All right, today we're talking about the aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, which we have covered labor markets, we have covered finance markets, and we have covered goods and service markets. So now aggregate level, think of aggregate as kind of aggregating out, it's the bigger, it's the macro part of our model, right? So this is like the combination of all the things we've already looked at, all into one model of supply and demand at the entire level of the economy. So it's pretty similar to the things we've already seen. We have on our y-axis is our price. At this point though, we're talking a price level. So when we see a price level, remember, price levels, GDP deflator, all tell us a comparison to 100, right? And in that case, this is where we can look at inflation. On our x-axis, instead of it being like a quantity per se, now we're looking at a quantity measure of GDP. So this is either going to be called the real output. Sometimes it's also called real GDP. Whatever you see those are both represent the exact same thing. So this is kind of quantifying the size of an economy, right? How big the economy is, what prices are doing. And so there are two new components we'll be able to measure given this new kind of marketplace we're looking at and looking at the entire economy. We're going to be able to measure unemployment and we're going to be able to measure inflation. We're going to do though in relative what's called potential GDP, or think about it as like our potential or our long run. So there are going to be three curves in this marketplace, right? We are going to have our standard kind of downward sloping demand curve. In this case, we aren't in this kind of linear form anymore. We're still downward sloping, but it's not this like straight line, right? There's a little bit more nuance to it. But this is our demand curve, and it's our aggregate demand curve. The second thing we have is our aggregate supply curve. Our aggregate supply curve is actually going to look a little bit different than what we've traditionally seen. So our aggregate supply curve is going to start off with a relatively flatter slope. And then at a certain point, which is around what's called the intermediate zone, we're going to see a much steeper slope. We're going to come to find out that each section of this aggregate supply represents a different kind of theory behind it. So this supply curve is not our only supply curve though. This is actually our short run supply curve. The last component of an aggregate supply, aggregate demand model is potential. So the last thing will be this green one. This green line is our long run supply curve. Long run aggregate supply. And this represents the potential in our marketplace. Think of a potential as if our market was running at 100% the entire time, that would be us at full capacity. Long run, or like I said, that's our potential, that's our cap. We can think about it kind of similar to the way we thought about price floors or price ceilings. Though our economy could be running at potential, it's really kind of like a maximum. Potential in the long run, over a long decades, years span of time, can slowly grow as an economy expands, but we don't see this long run curve that much. What we really end up seeing move is either our aggregate demand or our short run aggregate supply. Those are the things that really are those movers. And the only thing that really ends up moving long run supply is if our productivity, the capacity of our economy, technological advancements, something that makes it bigger, right? So, there are two other points that I made, right? I told you that this equilibrium here, just like we've seen before, remember our equilibrium is where aggregate supply, just like normal supply, is equal to demand. That's our equilibrium. That's this purple point here. From our equilibrium now, we're actually going to be able to interpret what's going on in this marketplace in terms of unemployment and in terms of inflation. We do that by its relative distance to the long run curve. So in order to have a better interpretation of it, I'm going to draw a few more lines. I'm going to draw another aggregate demand curve a little bit further away. We're going to call this aggregate demand. I'm going to call this aggregate demand 2. This will be 1. And then we're going to do a third one, which I know this might be a little confusing, but we'll get to it. Now, with this, we now have a couple different points. We have this equilibrium, we have this equilibrium, and we had our original equilibrium. Based on how close our equilibrium in the marketplace is to potential, will tell us what the relationship is to unemployment. So, let's talk about this furthest one, AD2, aggregate demand 2. In our aggregate demand curve, our second one, we are further away from potential than all the other ones. This is the furthest distance of our marketplace that we get. What this is telling us is that we are not utilizing all our resources, and one of our big resources in the macroeconomy is our labor market. So at this point, and we're going to call this equilibrium 2, at equilibrium 2, we are going to have high unemployment but we are at a relatively flat point of our supply, this red line, right? And we're also at a relatively lower price level. So in that case, we're actually going to have low inflationary pressures. So at that point there, we have those two things. We have at this point here, E2, we have high unemployment and low inflation. Now, if we look at a different point, and then we look at this point E3, right, with our third aggregate demand line, we're going to see something a lot different. At this point, we are much closer to potential, and we're kind of working at full capacity. I like to think about it as if you were a restaurant, right? The closer you are to potential, the closer you are to selling out of everything. But there are limits to what you can make, right? There's a production capacity. Just like there's in a restaurant, there's a production capacity for every single economy. And you can only make so many dishes, and you can only produce so many goods and services, and there's only so much money in your economy. The same exact thing happens. The closer we are to pushing 100%, you don't want to be pushing 100% all the time. The only response that firms have in a lot of cases, and restaurants have, to everything selling out is to continue to push prices up. Because remember, supply is this upward slope in general, because higher prices, more profits, right? Same thing, the same kind of comprehension when we go to aggregate. That's why demand also slopes downward still, is because just like it was in our labor markets, just like it was in the supply and the goods and service market, and just like it is in the finance market. We got this downward slope of demand because the higher prices are, the less people want it. The exact thing happens at the aggregate level too. So the closer we are to potential, the closer we are at capacity and production capacity, right? You can't keep hiring more people because we're actually we're close. If we're on that green line, we're at the natural rate of unemployment. And that means there aren't more people to employ. Your economy is really at its cap. And so at E3 here, we are actually at low unemployment. We're at the natural rate. Sorry, I know that's squished together. Write it again. We're at low unemployment. But because we are on this steeper portion of the short run line and we're at a higher level for prices, we are actually have high inflationary pressure. So at this point here, low unemployment, we're kind of towards capacity. We got everybody hired we can. We're at the natural rate of unemployment. Because remember, in any kind of economy, there's always a little bit of unemployment. There's always some turnover going on. And we have a lot of inflationary prices. Only thing that firms can do, is kind of keep raising prices because people are paying them. And then at this point, I'll draw it over here too, just so we can get everything together on the same kind of graph. This point over here is where we have that high unemployment. And we have low inflationary pressure. So, in this case, higher unemployment, the further away we are from potential, but we have lower inflationary pressure, the further we are away from potential. The closer we are to potential, the lower unemployment's going to be and the higher inflation's going to be. Can an economy produce above potential for a while? They're going to be borrowers. In chapter 10, we talked about trade. That's where you're going to have to start pulling resources from outside of your economy. And you definitely cannot survive above capacity for very long. You're burning all the engines all at once and you got nothing left for fuel. So, this is the point that becomes the most interesting, right? It is not always kind of this black and white case where we're either super high, super low, super high, super low. Sometimes we're at a point where we're enough of a distance away from both of our kind of extremes where there might be some unemployment at this point here. Inflation, not really a big issue, not a lot of pressure, but it's an okay. The market's okay. We have some unemployment, it's not high, it's not super low, and we have relatively okay, inflation's okay. Now, the next part of this video, we're going to run through an example like this in Excel.
Hello, welcome back, everybody. I'm Professor Power, and today we're going to run through an Excel practice activity, and we're going to do it two different ways. So at the beginning of this video, I did a walkthrough, just kind of writing out how aggregate demand and aggregate supply work. This time, I'm going to run through the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, and I'm going to do Excel using just like the app Excel. And I'm also going to do it in the web browser because I know the web browser can be kind of finicky, and I don't blame people when that's a hassle. I have a web browser is not the best version of Excel, and I apologize for any issues that anybody has had concerning it. So available to you now is this online practice. And I'm not going to keep this up the entire time, but I'm going to walk you through all the steps. And our goal is to be able to create kind of a model of aggregate demand and aggregate supply and do an interpretation of it. So again, remember aggregate demand is all those kind of components of the economy, just like we see with GDP, it's consumption, investment, government spending, and our net exports. And it slopes downwards just like it does with regular supply and demand and our other previous models, like in the labor market and the goods markets and the finance markets. And our aggregate supply is that upward slope. Traditionally, we had looked at a lot of things that were more linear in a sense, or straight lines. Now we're going to look at things that have a little bit more curve to a little bit more curve. Because in reality, the economy is not some perfect entity. Things shift all the time, up and down, and that's how we can model that here. So in this case, we have an economy, and like I said, we're going to end up producing something that looks a little bit like this. And so I'm going to do my best to do that. So the first thing we need to be able to have is just our three first columns. So the first three columns are our price level, just like that's our y-axis. Remember, price levels, like a GDP deflator, are an indication to us that we're doing a comparison between years, because a price level is what we can use to compare to that 100. And it really tells us if there's some kind of like increase in prices over time. So remember 100, thinking 100% base level. 110 means that there were higher prices next, 120, and so on and so forth, right? And then aggregate demand and aggregate supply are our x-axes. In this case, they really represent to us our GDP or our real potential or our real GDP, because remember, we're talking about inflation, so it's that real one. It really has all the components to it. So when we create a model like this, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to Insert, and we're going to insert just our scattered charts. So in this case, I'm going to do scattered with curved lines or smooth lines and markers. And then blank will pop up. And then what I'm going to do, you could also highlight these and insert, but this makes it a little easier so we don't have to change up axes or anything. We're going to right click and we're going to go to Select Data. And then we're going to go to Add. We're first going to add our aggregate demand. So if you click on whatever the title is that you have there, it'll automatically pop that in for you, which is really nice. Our X values is that aggregate demand, and our Y values, our Y values are our price. All right. Then we want to add in our aggregate supply. Click on that, this C1, and that'll propagate it there. Then we click on C2 to 8. That'll be our X values, and our Y values are our price, which is A2 to 8. Oops. A2 to 8. And we say, okay. And then, boom, it should pop up like this. What we'll notice, though, is it's kind of off to the side. And I know some people had issues with this, so, especially with other models. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually edit our framework. So if we click over here to one of our side axes, we're going to right click on it and we're going to say Format Chart Axis. What this is going to give us, click the wrong one, Format Axes, is this options here. So our bounds are the bounds of our graph or where it starts and stops. So in this case, these are our bounds for our y-axis, and I think we don't need to start at 0. We're going to start at 90. And then if you press enter, see how it goes up? We could even start at 100 if we wanted to. Now we can see the shape, right? This is a much better interpretation of what our shape should have looked like. We're going to do the exact same thing where we format our x-axis. So click on the x, right click it. This will pop up. And our minimum for this one is going to be 550. Now, there we go. That looks a little bit more like an aggregate supply and aggregate demand, and it's really giving us our Keynesian, our flatter area. We can see our intermittent zone where it kind of switches up, and we can see this steeper neoclassical version, or neoclassical portion. Next thing we want to do, we need to go to this plus and we need to give some axes titles. We also want a legend. Remember, we want to be able to understand what we're trying to be looking at here. So we're going to add both of those, make it a little bigger. Our y-axis, remember, is that price level. And our x-axis is real, either real output, output, or real GDP. Whatever you want to put there. Tickles the fancy. Then maybe I want to put in a nice little title. What did I title this one? This is our aggregate supply and demand model of our sample economy, which was for Valeria. Valoria. All right, so now we have aggregate demand and aggregate supply. The last thing we need to add in, right? We're missing our long run. We're missing that potential. So in this case, to add potential, potential is really just a vertical line, right? It marks kind of like our 100% in the economy. So all we have to do to add that bad boy in is we just have to create a new column, just like this, name it potential. And then because it's a vertical line, it's not going to change values for any of our prices. It remains constant. So it's going to be constant right at that 750 mark. Add this in, click on your thing, right click it, go to select data, add, name this one the potential, set all our X's to here, and set all our Y's to the price levels. Press OK, press OK, and there it is. Look at that. That's our potential. All right, that's our potential. Maybe even if we wanted to, we could go over into our axes again, click it, format that, and we'll say our new minimum is 110, right? Maybe this will look a little bit different. Now we have it reaching from everywhere. So the next thing we have to do when we get this, right? This looks great. This is exactly what we need to do. We need to be able to identify where do these two things cross? Well, lucky for us, the numbers that we have tell us exactly where they cross. Remember our, let's make this red. Our equilibrium is where supply meets demand, or they're equal to each other, equilibrium. And in this case, it is at a price level of 130, and it is at a GDP of, or real output of 680. So the next thing we need to be able to interpret now is what that means in terms of unemployment and inflationary pressure. So we went through all this stuff. And we said, all right, these are our axes, what the real means. Where do they meet? We added the potential in, and then we need what this really means. So there are two circumstances in this case. If we are to the left, make a hand left, of potential GDP, the economy is going to be below capacity, below that 100%. Anywhere that I'm like kind of like highlighting over here to the left of the green line is below capacity. Anywhere at or above the green line to the right is above capacity. If we are below capacity, that means we're going to have higher unemployment because not everybody is employed. Even if we're at capacity, there is some unemployment. That's the natural rate. Remember, there are just turnover, structural, the cycle of business cycles. But if we're to the left, we're to the left. That means we're below capacity. There's higher unemployment because there's unused resources and there's not a huge pressure on prices. If we are near or to the right of potential, so bring it back to if we are near or to the right of potential of this green line, that means we have lower unemployment because we are near capacity. We have all the people employed we can. We are using our resources and our prices are rising. Why are our prices rising? Well, that's because we're using everything up And if demand is meeting supply in that case, right? People are paying the prices, then firms are just gonna keep increasing them, right? There are a couple other reasons why we have kind of more inflationary pressures. But you can kind of think about it as one of those things like if we set it, they buy. If people will pay it, they're gonna keep increasing it. Um, so at the graph we just made, which looks like this, hopefully, what we'll see is that we have some inflationary pressure. We're not super close, but we're not super far away. We're in an kind of way. We're still on that Keynesian, the flatter kind of slope of our aggregate supply in the short run. Firms can increase output. They don't have to raise prices too much to kind of coincide with it. And there's plenty of unused capacity. Unemployment wise, it's higher. It's not super high. We're not super far away, but it's relatively high because we're to the left of potential GDP and we're not maximizing, we're not using all our resources. So now I'm going to run through the exact same thing, but I'm going to do it in the browser version just to make sure we're all on the same page. So don't mind my 9 million tabs. We're going to go to Cape Cod Community College and we're going to run through how to access again. So we need to go to Cape Cod Community College. You need to go to My 4Cs. Yours will not have all these things. Ignore this. Please don't steal my identity. Just kidding. And then you're gonna go over to these 9 little blue tabs in the corner and click on Excel. And then you need to log back in again for safety. We're gonna create, oh, we already have one. We're gonna open this old workbook. All right. So I have the same things in. I have aggregate, I got price level, I got aggregate supply, and then I want to put potential in here. Did I spell potential right? I can also copy it over pretty easily. But that's the most important. We got our 3. Now it looks a little weird, but who cares? All right, so this is gonna seem a little silly, but I'm gonna give us a little bit of a step-by-step, without much audio overview on how to do this on the web browser version. So what I've found in researching and what you'll end up finding if you look this up is that the web browser version has this kind of glitch that ends up happening, and that's why we're all suffering with it. So when you try to add in a third series, what it ends up doing is pretty much deleting what you've already done. The reason for that is kind of complicated. So when you try to add in a third line, like I know some people have tried to do on the web browser version, in the way that you try to do it with the desktop version, it just doesn't always work. There are some chances that it will work, and when I went through this whole line, it worked for me fine. But if you have a more updated version of the browser, which most people do, it kind of updates on its own, it might not always work every time. So in this version, what we're going to find out is that all I want you to do is be able to get that supply and demand line in there, and then you can have that potential just as a shape. You can just add the third line in and label it separately. It's just a lot easier. I don't want it to be more overcomplicated than it needs to be. If you understand how to add 2 lines in, I know you understand how to add the third one in. Like I said, the issue ends up being it just doesn't like it when you try to independently add a series in. I know that if you go and you highlight everything and you have it auto add stuff in, that it will give you something, but that has the flipped axes. So the issue ends up being it really is just the web browser. It's not you. Don't take it personally. Like I said, check out Reddit, just Google it. It's an issue that the web browser version has. So, like I said, hopefully this helps that I did a walkthrough with both versions and how to do it by hand. If there are any more questions on this exercise, please reach out to me. Otherwise, go through the rest of the video, make pauses where you need to, and you are all set.